Okay, folks, so we're back at it again, and what I want to do is I want to go ahead and create myself a baseline and a cap height here. And I want to start talking about curved letters, okay? So what's a curved letter? Curved letters are going to be things like your O, your G, your C, your S, okay? Those are curved letters. And then we have letters that have curve in them, like your P, or your B, or your D, or your R, right? They all have curve in them along with straight letters, right? Or excuse me, straight lines. So we want to kind of go ahead and play around with those first. So let's start with this one right here, the O, okay? So it's a circle, essentially, right? And I know that a circle is probably one of the hardest things for you to draw because it's the hardest thing for everyone to draw. Straight lines, perfect circles, man, they bug people out. The thing is that you're not drawing a perfect circle. You're drawing a round letter form. You're drawing an O, right? So it doesn't need to be a perfect circle. But the thing is that it can't be a thin oval because a perfect circle, excuse me, a thin oval tends to be a zero. Okay? So what I mean by that is this. So I'll go ahead and I'll draw an O, and I literally will kind of just make circles without drawing anything first. And I tend, especially when I'm creating curves, I really tend to go light first. And you might not even be able to see it. Okay? It's super, super, super light, right? And I'll go over it a couple times. And then when I'm happy, I'll get real thick on it, right? So there we go, there's an O. Now, that's an O, so what's a zero look like then? Well, a zero is gonna kind of have more of that kind of ovalness to it. And that's a zero. Sometimes you see in people's handwriting, and you'll even see in fonts sometimes, that a zero will even have a slash that goes through it to even further let people know that it's a different letter form. When you're drawing, you can do those sorts of things if you want. It's totally up to you whether you want to do it or not. But the concept of the O and the zero need to kind of get thrown out there first before we talk about any other curves, because this is the only one that you really need to have more roundness to this letter form than this one. Because if we're talking about the letter G, for example, I can have a nice round G like this, or I can have a G that is more representational of an oval like this. And they both work, okay? That is a G and that is a G, and there's no one that's going to tell me different than that, right? That those are both that letter form, okay? So the difference between, again, an O and a G or a C or anything else that's got curve in it is that a more of an oval O is always going to be a zero, but you can do an oval G or an oval C and you're going to be fine. So you can do a thinner one of those, and it's not like against the rules or anything like that. And again, rules, like, let them be damned, but the thing is that they have to be there. So you have to kind of play around with that. So let's take a look at, we did a G, so you got a concept of a C already. We did an O. Let's take a look at one of those letters that people get weirded out on in regular kind of writing, okay? And here's the thing, I'm a dad, so I've got 3 kids, and they're all lovely, and one is currently 9, the other one is 7, and then my son is almost 3. So I've watched my 9 and my 7-year-old grow up and learn to write. My 3-year-old is just attempting now. And when we go ahead and we start to write, we grasp our hands like this usually, and we kind of go around, and we're really kind of rigid with our strokes, right? And then we start to go ahead and we start to hold our pens and pencils a lot differently as time goes on. But the thing is that people struggle with a single letter all the time when they start to overthink it, and that is the simple letter S, right? People struggle with the letter S all the time because they end up trying to create the top part of it bigger than the bottom part of it. They do this, and don't ask me why, and you probably have done this yourself, especially if you ever tried creating like bubble letters or any kind of like thicker letter form or anything like that. I guarantee that you've done that. So when you're thinking about the S, right, I tend to think about an S kind of like I think about an 8, right? And that's a bad 8 that I just did. So let's go ahead and let's do a better 8. Oh, look at that, right? I go ahead and I start to just kind of like create my number 8, and you can see how an S kind of lives inside of there. So what I tend to do is I tend to kind of probably go, I don't know, maybe about a quarter of the way down from my cap height, right? And I start to make a mark, and I start to make a small curve. And then I put this thing on here that we call this a spine, and my spine tends to go all the way down, and I start making a bigger curve on the bottom. And then I loop it up. And there we go, that's an S. Now if I was creating the letter 8, or excuse me, the number 8, I would do that same exact motion, right? Except I would go ahead and I would connect that. That's all, right? Or an infinity sign, right? A lot of times people will go ahead and they'll create 8s like this, right? And that's fine, but you can create an 8, you know, just like that as well. So either can work, and they're all useful, but I find 8s and S's to basically be the same exact letter form. You can create an S so it's wide, and you can create an S so it's very skinny. They both work. Just make sure that when you are creating an S, you don't overdo this first curve, because if you do, you're going to end up having that little kind of like, almost looks like a backwards question mark kind of a thing going on, right? And again, you know, we've all been there before, so if that's a pitfall that you have when you create like bubble letters and things like that, all you got to do is you got to practice it. And furthermore, you just got to think about it a little bit, because it's more than just handwriting. You know, you're creating a message, you're creating communication. So those are things you want to think about. Okay, so let's take a look at another couple letter forms here, and then we're going to move to actually creating a word or two. And do I need the ruler? No, I don't. I'm just kind of like basically eyeing it, but it's, you can't even see where the line is because the shadow's there. I'm just really trying to model a best practice for you, and I did that, and look at that, that's totally taller there than it is there. It's okay though, right? I don't always use this nowadays, but in the beginning I always did, right? So let's create an R. Okay, so an R's got a vertical part to it, right? And then it's got a curve, and that curve can be a really, really, really kind of thin curve, right? Or that curve can be a much wider curve. Okay, both can work. Now, the thing I'd like to point out is that these are not R's right now, these are the letter P, right? And if I want to create R's, I have to just go ahead and create what's known as a leg, okay? And so I can go ahead and I can create a leg from all different points. And I'm going to zoom in so we can see, okay? So I can create a leg from this point. I can create a leg from this point. I can even create a leg from this point. It's 100% up to me where I want to create a leg from. But just be aware that you have whatever kind of thickness you've decided on for the round part, for the curved part of this. And so if I go ahead and I try to create a leg that goes from this point here down to here, where I try to create a leg that goes from this point here down to there, they may look a little funky, okay? So you want to think about that when you're creating your letter forms, is what kind of letter did you create? You know, and in this case, I'm going to find that midpoint and I'm going to pull my leg out. And look at that. That R stands up pretty well on its own, right? If I go ahead and I have a really, really wide one, that means I can have a really wide leg. And if I have a really thin one, I should probably have a leg that starts, you know, really tight there. Okay? Those are things you want to think about for sure. Notice too, as I did this, none of these things are the same, right? And it's because I have a different kind of width happening here in my curve, right? My counters are way different. Remember, a counter is that empty space inside of a letter form, right? So my counters are way, way, way different. So I'd like to also point out that K's are going to be the same exact thing. I'm going to have two things. Along with a leg and a K, I'm also going to have what's called an arm. So again, about midpoint, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to push this arm up, right? So now I have the ability, and I can have my leg start here, or here, or here. I have the ability, however I want to do this. Since this is a pretty wide angle that I've created here, it's almost like, you know, a right triangle that I've created, it would probably make sense for me to go ahead and build my leg coming out from here to right about there. So I have a nice stable letter form. Again, if I did it from here, right, imagine that's not there right now, that might be a really funky looking letter. And if I did it all the way out here, well, that could maybe work, but also might end up looking like a really funky letter, okay? Now, again, as I mentioned before, these are low contrast sans serifs. That doesn't mean that they're just thin letters, right? Because I've been drawing thin letters. I can very easily go ahead and make these wider letters, right? I can put some weight to them, right? You think about, you know, visual weight. I can go ahead and I can throw that on these things pretty easily. There's lots of ways in which people do this, okay? So I'm going to show you the way that we all did it, like when we were drawing in our notebooks as kids, and then the way that I probably would recommend. So the way that I doodled when I was younger, and I'd be a liar if I said I wasn't doing it still today, is that I'll go ahead and when I want to create that A, I'll make that angle and I'll bring it up, and then I'll bring this over, and I'll just go ahead and I'll draw an A out. Now, luckily for me, I've been a designer for 20 years, so without trying hard, I can usually kind of make things to be pretty similar thicknesses. It's not something that I was able to do right off the bat, because I can remember making these kinds of things, and they would be all kind of funky looking, like that, right? But I just from doing this stuff in repetition and muscle memory, I tend to be able to do that more and more. But I don't do that. I still don't. When I'm doodling, I totally do that, 100%. But when I'm actually doing real hand lettering and like somebody's paying me, I draw out my letter forms, right? And I draw them out nice and light. And I think about if there's going to be a space there. I 100% do, right? But I think about this stuff, and then I kind of think about that I'm going to be going out in one direction, and I'm going to be going out in another direction. And that's just kind of just how my brain works when I'm doing this. And it's kind of funky that maybe I'm thinking this way, but it tends to work out for me. So I'll go ahead and I'll make a line here, and I'll have a little bit of space, and I'll make a line here. And then I'll just build this other one out a little bit. And instead of trying to build it out on one side, I build it out for both sides. And I tend to have a lot more luck that way when I'm creating letter forms. And same with the crossbar. I'll start here in the middle, and then I'll add a little bit here, and I'll add a little bit here. And what this does for me is two things. One, it allows me to build these things up over time, which means I can actually increase my thickness as I need it. And two, okay, the other thing that it does for me is if I build it kind of nice and light like this, I can then go in and I can easily make outlines around the final shape when it's all said and done. And I can even fill that shape when it's all said and done, right? So again, just because it's a low contrast sans serif, it does not mean that it is thin. It can be very, very thick. And that can work out. Think of letter forms like Impact, right? Like that font Impact. Impact is a really, really, really thick font. It's got a whole lot of visual weight to it, right? And that is a real kind of powerful font when you use it correctly, right? And with that said though, there is not a lot of contrast, right? It is a low contrast font because it's all thick, right? So this again is a low contrast sans serif because we have the same weight across the whole thing, right? Just like that is a low contrast sans serif because we have the same weight across the entire letter form. So when you're going ahead and you're practicing this, okay, by all means, practice thin letters and practice thicker ones. When you practice those thicker ones, don't do it like when you doodle, okay? Do it like this, where you're actually building those letter forms out, and you'll find that you'll have way more success than if you're trying to create that block. Especially, I was talking about S's before, right? Man, when you try to go ahead and create the S that's kind of thicker, we've all been there, right? Where it doesn't work out as well as we had hoped, right? But you do start doing it this way, and then, oh, check it out. Listen, you can build this out real simple and real easy. Works out every time. So give that a try, practice, and when we come to the next video, we're going to start building a word or two. Thank you.